Hey there folks, the Infinite Jukebox here with another video. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but it is no longer 2024, it is 2025, and that means I have to do one of my favorite activities, which is be legally obligated to talk about my favorite albums and EPs and least favorite albums of the prior year, or else I get beat up by YouTube, and also Anthony Fantano. So, without further ado, to start off the 3 lists that I do yearly to round up my favorites and least favorites of every year on this channel, starting off with my top 20 EPs of 2024. The one video of these 3 that nobody really cares about, but I still do anyway because I care, goddammit. So, here you go. 20. Bon Iver, SABLE. One of the simplest EPs on the entirety of this list. This is just a really great EP from Bon Iver, the indie folk, sort of increasingly experimental project, often led by Justin Vernon above all else. It's just a very nice, brief, 3, technically 4-track if you count the intro, EP that delivers exactly what you'd expect from Bon Iver at this point if you've heard any of their prior material that leans more towards the folk and folk-adjacent directions. I mean, it's extremely pretty, there's some lovely instrumentation here that feels just as lush as it does minimalistic in some parts. Justin Vernon's vocals are great, the songwriting is lovely, and it all gives this very cold yet at the same time endearing and loving sort of feel to it. A record that just feels icy but in a way that is extremely endearing. It's kind of a difficult vibe to describe unless you've found yourself experienced with previous works from Bon Iver, but as someone who has myself, and assuming you probably have too if you're watching a small music YouTube channel with under 8,000 subscribers, then I think you'll understand what I mean. It's a very brief experience, but it's a very pleasant experience, and I can't really knock it for that at all. It's just extremely, extremely, extremely pleasant. I think that's a pretty good thing overall. 19. The Garden, 6 Desperate Ballads. Look, I've always been one to kind of knock on The Garden. I mean, I don't think they're the worst band in existence or anything like that. They're kind of easy to make fun of, the aesthetic and the style and the lightly comedic at times directions that they go in. It's just very easy to mock at times, even if I don't actually hate them or anything like that. And, I mean, you can kind of tell I don't hate them at all, because here's this EP showing up at number 19. I mean, it's just a really strong EP that showcases why a lot of people like The Garden so much. I mean, this is a project that frequently features a wide variety of artistic directions, and I think this EP shows that off nicely. Every song is extremely singular in its own right. There's really no bleed together, really no connectivity between these tracks, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's almost like a showcase in a way. If you were to introduce somebody to The Garden tomorrow, this would be a good place to start with. I mean, hell, I even like the clown laughter that goes on throughout this, a part of the whole Garden's shtick that I've never really been that into. I just feel like this EP clicked with me on a deeper level than any of their other work has up to this point for the most part, and I won't complain about that. This is a great one. I really, really enjoy this EP, and I think you're missing out if you don't at least give this a shot, even if you are like me and haven't particularly cared for The Garden's past work. 18. RiTchie and Feardorian, Quiet Warp Xpress. RiTchie and Feardorian are 2 individuals with largely underappreciated years throughout 2024. I mean, RiTchie made his solo debut from Injury Reserve with a record that I thought did not get nearly enough love and was too heavily criticized for an album that I thought was one of the most interesting rap and rap-adjacent projects of the entire year. Meanwhile, Feardorian, someone who I've never really talked about on this channel, has brought some fantastic production to the table for quite a while now, and seeing the 2 of them combine forces on Quiet Warp Xpress results in an EP that certainly won't be for everybody with how abstract and intentionally disjointed it feels at certain points, but as for myself and someone who likes this overall sound that feels somewhat aggressive, yet at the same time very light in the sense that it's minimalistic in points, yet at the same time it never really embraces any sort of traditional structure or anything like that, as well as someone like myself who really likes RiTchie's overall delivery and style and persona behind the mic at this point as he continues to evolve in a post-Injury Reserve landscape, I think that this is a really strong EP. Again, won't be everybody's bag, but it certainly is mine, and I really do enjoy it. 17. Gel, persona. It seems like Gel find tiny ways to reinvent themselves every time they put out a new record, be it a full-length album or an EP, and that remains true here on Persona, their latest EP as of recording and uploading this, which is honestly maybe my favorite work that is credited exclusively to them to date. I mean, not only are they just a musically competent band, but I feel that Sammy Kaiser as a vocalist, I feel like they bring a sort of metal, beatdown, hardcore edge to this record that allows it to stand out from their prior EPs, from their prior full-length studio records that they've been involved with, so on and so forth. It's an EP that I think is not only really solid, really strong, maybe the best work and most consistent work they've ever put out to date, with some heavy amounts of immediacy in most of the tracks here, but it's also just a record that consistently sees them grow artistically and musically as they bring to the table some more intricate instrumentation, but at the same time really up the aggression and violence on a couple of tracks here. I think that this is one of the best punk-oriented projects that you got out of 2024, at least in terms of short-form EPs and whatnot, especially the track Shame, the second track on this EP that is easily one of the best songs they've ever put out, if not their best to date. It's just an EP that sees a band that's always had a lot of potential continue to grow into something that I continue to enjoy more and more with each passing release, which is something that I'm always happy to see. Number 16, Bad Bad Not Good, Mid-Spiral Order. This was easily my favorite of all of the mid-spiral EPs that Bad Bad Not Good put out in a trilogy throughout 2024. I think this is the one that kind of succeeds the most with its experimentations in the realm of samba jazz, but I also think it's just genuinely a really great new jazz EP that Bad Bad Not Good kind of have always executed pretty well. I mean, sure, this doesn't necessarily sound the exact same as most of their full-length studio albums, or even the other two mid-spiral EPs for that matter, but as a whole, I think it does showcase the best of their abilities as instrumentalists, while at the same time not necessarily overstaying its welcome in any particular regard. Feeling pretty raw in some places too, not overly smoothed out, which was kind of my qualm with the other two EPs that came out in the mid-spiral trilogy, and I won't elaborate on this too terribly much because this isn't the last time you'll see them on this list, but I digress. It's a very good EP, and it continues to prove that Bad Bad Not Good are one of at least the most interesting jazz collective that are coming out of Canada right now, or one of the most interesting jazz collectives out of Canada right now, at the very least. Number 15, Laserdym 700. Lazer's Evil Incorporated. Look, I don't have a lot to say about this, just as I didn't have a lot to say about this in my original review of it, but at the same time, I still do need to just clarify once again, this is one of the best EPs of 2024. It's just a relentlessly DIY experience, and that's something that I can highly appreciate, and I'm glad that Laserdym 700 has been receiving the attention that he has throughout 2024 as one of the most unique and interesting voices coming out of underground southern rap right now. I mean, the guy's presence here is extremely intense, with some flows that go between extremely smooth and extremely awkward, with some extremely unique intent is the only way that I can describe it. A singular voice that isn't really comparable to anybody else right now, yet at the same time he embraces a lot of his influences extremely well. I love his songwriting style, it being so honest, so transparent. I mean, the man's literally admitting to using BandLab to make beats on the EP. It's amazing. I love hearing it. I love his overall style. I love the direction that he's been going in, and I can't wait to see what ends up happening for him in the future as he continues to get more attention, because this EP really does bring a very vulnerable and artistically raw, by definition raw, style to the table that I don't think you can really hear in an accessible way, at least that often in 2024. Number 14, Little Simz, Drop 7. I saw this EP get a lot of flack when it initially came out, the latest entry in Little Simz's Drop series of EPs, and I don't really get why. I think it's really good. I think that it sees her experiment with dance and club sounds in a way that is extremely interesting, not allowing some of the more lush influences on Sometimes I Might Be Introvert, her most acclaimed album to date arguably, influence her to stick to that lane exclusively. It's just a really excellent EP overall. Sure, it isn't mind-blowing, and there are some parts that intentionally, in my eyes, feel a bit stiff or awkward, but I think that that's kind of what adds to the entire experience here. It's a very raw and, at times, free-flowing EP that feels like a complete and finished record in and of itself. I personally really enjoy it. I think it's really fun in a lot of places, some great production from Jackwob as well, and Simz here sounds great as ever, though I think you could argue even on her weaker projects, she herself as a presence is still amazing, so that doesn't really come as any surprise. I digress. I think that Drop 7 is a really good EP, and too many people kind of dunked on it in concept without even really giving it a chance. But hey, I guess maybe it's just a not for everybody thing. It's just a shame that it was as polarizing as it was and didn't really get the attention that some of her more recent projects have. Number 13, Lockslip, self-titled. Speaking of EPs that deserved way more attention than they actually got, this debut EP from Los Angeles-based mathcore, metalcore, whatever core you want to consider them, band Lockslip is easily one of the best heavy music adjacent kind of short-form projects that I heard throughout the entirety of 2024. I mean, there's some seriously intense percussion work going on here from Noah Baxter in particular, alongside some great riffs. Sarah Gregory as a vocalist is one of the most intense blank core vocalists that I've heard in a while, some of the most in-your-face vocal performances I've heard throughout metal the entirety of 2024. Just a great EP that deserved way more recognition from the scene than it ultimately got. I think it's a shame that no one really paid attention to this outside of really deep and dedicated mathcore and metalcore circles, because what goes on here musically is not only technically proficient, but it's extremely raw, it's extremely impassioned, and I think it represents everything that can be great about a young and up-and-coming metal band in any genre or subgenre or any regard. It's just a fantastic EP, and I'm really excited to see what they do next. And if you haven't heard this one, I implore you to please go check it out. It is a great one, I swear. 12. Ugly, Twice Around the Sun. I don't think it's necessarily a massive secret that the UK experimental music scene in general has been kind of popping off within music nerd circles for a number of years at this point, but Ugly originally predated that and kind of ended up getting the short end of the stick, honestly. I mean, they immediately got overshadowed by bands like Black Country New Road, Dry Cleaning, Black Midi, Squid, etc., etc. Bands that ended up getting way more critical acclaim than Ugly initially did when they first started debuting around 2016 when they first formed. So it's nice to see them kind of get a chance to step back into the spotlight that they deserve. I mean, they may not exceed those bands that I just mentioned in terms of how much they blow me away, but at the same time, this is still a great EP. I mean, there's some very lush moments on here that I think are executed very nicely, and while they may seem unoriginal at a first glance, they have a lot of minor qualities that really differentiate them from a lot of their peers. A lot of the kind of peculiar and uneasy moments, such as the EP closing track I'm Happy You're Here in particular, to the slightly alt-country kind of influences on songs like Icy Windy Sky, to the dual vocals handled by Samuel Goder and Jasmine Miller Solshella. I think that there's a lot going on in this EP that makes it feel very singular for UK-based music right now, and if you haven't given it a chance, I highly recommend you do, especially if you enjoy some of those bands that are more well-known that I just mentioned a little bit ago. 11. Gene Dawson, Boohoo. Gene Dawson being a fairly unpredictable artist is something that's not a secret, but you can tell no matter what Dawson puts out that it's always going to be interesting, and I mean, that's exactly what happens here. It just happens that interesting also equates to very, very good. I mean, this is an EP with some great, very lush and well-thought-out dynamic instrumentals, as well as some great vocal performances and strong songwriting. And more than that, I love how grand a lot of this EP feels. Despite being only 3 songs, it stylistically feels absolutely massive and diverse, with the opening track, New Age Crisis, one of the 3 actual full-length songs on this record, being one of the best songs that came out of any EP this entire year, and one of Dawson's best cuts to date. Yeah, as a whole, it's just a very good EP, and it's Gene Dawson doing what Gene Dawson does best, which is be absolutely unique in every way possible. The fusions of extremely DIY, noise pop rock, if you will, here with more traditional pop and R&B kind of influences. It's very singular, it's very much exclusively Dawson, and I don't think that it really could be better shown off than here in a brief and, at times, extremely explosive package. Number 10. Baby Rose and Bad Bad Not Good, Slow Burn. See, I told you that wasn't going to be the last you'd hear from Bad Bad Not Good on this list. Baby Rose, soul singer and performer, collaborating here with Bad Bad Not Good, the previously mentioned on this list Canadian jazz band, and the result is a really phenomenal little EP that is extremely accessible and even traditional in some points in terms of how it approaches jazz pop and jazz soul, but at the same time, it feels like it's executed just a little bit better than most other smaller projects like this. I mean, Baby Rose is, of course, the main highlight here, her vocal work being absolutely phenomenal on tracks like One Last Dance, but Bad Bad Not Good deserve a lot of credit here as well for being an appropriately subtle backing band, never really going above and beyond to make sure that their contributions are known to a fault, but at the same time, their presence here is extremely valuable, and it allows them to create this, again, very accessible, mellow, laid-back, jazzy atmosphere that feels just as cool as it does emotional at times, coming across as very nocturnal and smoky in the EP's best moments. As a whole, I just think that this is a really nice collaboration that allows Baby Rose to do what she does best, and Bad Bad Not Good to show off a side of themselves that is much more subtle and nuanced than what some of their full-length albums that focus exclusively on them may bring about at times. It's just a really lovely collab. Number 9. Frost Children and Haru Nemuri. Soul Kiss. You know, I'm not even a big fan of Frost Children, and I'm not necessarily a die-hard fan of Haru Nemuri either, but when I heard about this EP, I was extremely hyped for it, maybe more hyped than I was for most other EPs throughout 2024. I mean, the collaboration going on here is such an interesting one from two artistically highly unique artists, and despite the fact that I don't love everything Nemuri has put out, and I don't love most things Frost Children have put out, Soul Kiss is a genuinely phenomenal EP. I mean, the Pro siblings here have some absolutely amazing chemistry with each other, as well as some huge personalities behind the mic that give everything a massive attitude, while Nemuri is a force to be reckoned with from a vocal standpoint, having a huge amount of versatility going between these very soft and at times fragile moments and these very electric and almost at times hardcore slash metal adjacent vocal style moments in a way that I think is very hard to see replicated anywhere else in music right now, and things end off very nicely too with a genuinely climactic moment that makes the whole thing worth listening to as a full-length listening experience. I mean, Soul Kiss may not necessarily be the best or most interesting thing that either have put out on their own, but then again, at the same time, I would argue it's maybe the best work that either have put out in general. At least it's my favorite thing Frost Children have been involved with, and it's the best thing that I've heard from Nemuri in a little bit, I will say. So it's nice to see a collaboration like this go so well with two artistically unique voices and result in one of the best EPs of the year for me, personally. Number 8. Machine Girl. Super Freq EP. Because it's like frequency. Freq. F-R-E-Q. Wow, I just misspelled the word frequency. Jeez. You know, it's funny. This EP was made in relation to some cyberpunk, like, comic or manga that at the time that I originally reviewed this knew nothing about. I still know nothing about it, but this EP has continued to grow on me a lot, and now it's one of my favorites of the year, unquestionably, so do with that information what you will. I mean, what is here is some of the best music that we've gotten from Machine Girl in a little bit. I mean, the melodic, synth-punky kind of vibe of Black Glass and Dance in the Fire, the psychedelic kind of moments that happen on the EP closing track Big Time Freak are just some of the most nicely produced, some of the most structurally interesting things that I feel Machine Girl has put out in a little while at this point. In fact, I actually like this EP more than I did MG Ultra, the album that Machine Girl put out last year, well, this year, last year, 2024, that I just didn't really cover on my channel because I wasn't super blown away by it. And I think that this EP is a much better example of the diversity of sound that they're capable of, as well as how Machine Girl is capable of being aggressive and in your face like they are frequently known for, yet at the same time, very sonically dynamic. I think that this is a pretty excellent EP overall, and you'd be amiss to miss this one. Number 7. Nourished by Time. Catching Chickens. Every time that I listen to this EP, I end up enjoying it a little bit more. I mean, Marcus Brown, aka Nourished by Time, has been on a lot of people's radar for a while now, longer than me even. I was late to the release of Erotic Probiotic 2, arguably his breakthrough EP that really made him a beloved figure, or I guess that was more of a proper album, but I digress. Nourished by Time, great project, and Catching Chickens, great EP, very brief, of course, as comes with most EPs, but at the same time, some of the best songwriting Brown has ever delivered on here is, you know, some of the most profound production that he's ever brought to the table here. This EP feeling constantly lush, rapidly increasing in certain parts to create this very spacious and at times massive feeling record that at the same time never really strays away from the Nourished by Time identity of being a fairly DIY kind of project. As a whole, I just think it's a really enjoyable EP and one of Brown's best works to date, no question. Number 6, Liturgy, Immortal Life 2. You know, it's funny, Raven Hunt Hendricks and company, as big of a Liturgy fan as I am, are often pretty pretentious. I rarely use that word to describe music, but it does frequently seem like, as much as I love a lot of what Liturgy puts out, there's constantly some sort of artistic ideology or nonsensical manifesto that comes behind it that is pretty much exclusively there for the sake of creating some bad takes from Hendrix and some extremely confusing or otherwise faux profound statements within the music that Liturgy puts out, when I already love them from a musical and creative standpoint based on their music alone. That being said, it is funny that I can say that and also say that this band re-recorded one of the worst EPs I've heard in my life, dating all the way back to 2008, when Liturgy were barely even a band yet. I mean, sure, they were like a project, undoubtedly, but man, boy, that the original Immortal Life is a horrible EP. One of the most directionless EPs I've ever put out by a metal band that I've heard, at least I've ever heard, that I've ever experienced. It's a terrible, terrible record. So to hear them re-record it here in their modern form, sure, it's not as groundbreaking as some of their full-length projects, but I think it's actually a wonderful re-recording of a project that should have been thrown to the wayside and completely forgotten about, as it had been by most, if not 99.9% of Liturgy fans until 2024, when they re-recorded it here on Immortal Life 2. I mean, I don't think it ever loses the raw and simplistic nature of the original Immortal Life EP, which is why some people actually do like the original Immortal Life EP, but it definitely brings things to a more modern style for Liturgy, bringing in a lot of that rawness, a lot of that noise rock kind of energy here, yet at the same time fully embracing their modern talents, much better production, much more well-directioned instrumentation. These sort of questionable influences in the realms of electronic music on the original are not necessarily fully lost here, but at the same time are nowhere near as awful, in fact not awful at all, as they were on the original EP, so on and so forth. It's just an EP that takes the original ideas of the earliest days of Liturgy and actually knows what to do with them, which is something that they did not have with them the first time around, and it results in one of my favorite EPs of the year, an EP that's both extremely impressive from the perspective of a band reaching into the oldest parts of their back catalog to reintroduce to a new fan base with a new sound, and also from a kind of endearing perspective of a band re-recording old music that they themselves will probably admit is far from their best work and turn it into something that feels like them in the modern day, yet at the same time a tribute to their past selves. It's a really lovely thing to hear, despite the fact that it's black metal and the term lovely rarely goes with the entire genre. Number 5, Alien Chicks, Indulging the Mobs. One of, if not the most interesting debut EP that we've gotten from any band throughout the entirety of 2024, Alien Chicks' first proper project with Indulging the Mobs is a demonstration of what makes me think of them as one of the most interesting bands coming out of the UK right now, despite the fact that they haven't gotten nearly the amount of attention that they really do deserve. I mean, the influences here is a vast array of noise rock and funk and avant-garde jazz and even some more traditional indie rock thrown in there, all to make for something that has an absolutely bizarre take on all of those ideas at once, yet at the same time it never feels like it lacks cohesion. I mean, it's always an interesting EP that never stops bringing new things to the table, whether it's the rhythm section on tracks like the closer Slinky Man that are really interesting to hear and work extremely well, or the sometimes like semi-rapped vocal delivery that you get on track like Steve Buscemi, one of my favorite EP-based cuts of the year. It's very charismatic and it works well in and to an equal extent. It just feels like this entire record is the definition of what happens when a fresh-faced and extremely driven, ambitious band take the time to put out a well-developed and impassioned EP, and the result is one of the best debuts, period, that I heard throughout the entirety of 2024. And if you missed this one, I know I've said this multiple times throughout this video for various EPs, but if you missed this one, please do yourself a favor and check it out, because if you don't, you really are missing out. Number 4, Maruja, Connla's Well. This is a band and an EP that's kind of been talked about to death by a lot of other music nerds that are pretty much exactly like me, but with different hairstyles and different hats. But with that being said, I still do think this is one of the best EPs of the year, no question, and there's a reason that Maruja are one of the most beloved up-and-coming sort of experimental rock bands on the planet right now, at least within certain circles. I mean, what's delivered on this record is absolutely phenomenal, from the deranged noise rock of tracks like The Invisible Man to some of the more mellow moments, especially the album closing track, Resisting Resistance, which kind of leans into Maruja's jazz influences and acts as a very nice come-down after the chaos of a lot of the record. As a whole, this is just a really phenomenal, again, fairly short demonstration of what Maruja are capable as a band. I think that as a whole, there's a reason that they are so hyped up by so many people, and it's because they're capable of delivering this fusion of punk and noise rock and jazz and post-rock all into this singular sound that is pretty esoteric, all things considered. I don't really think there's a ton of bands that sound that much like them at this point, and this EP is yet another example of them refining that sound to a further extent, making for one of the best EPs of 2024, bar none. Number 3, Birds in Row and Coilguns, You and I in the Gap. Birds in Row and Coilguns are both respectively beloved members of the European sort of post-hardcore scene, and it's really nice seeing them collaborate into what is basically a jam session of sorts, but it feels like much more than that. This is a record that really melds both of their respective styles together and creates something that is unique from anything that either have really put out in the past, with there being a very airy feel about everything here that's at times deeply emotional, with some incredibly visceral vocal work and instrumentation from both sides coming across as extremely well thought out and technical, yet at the same time very raw in many places, coming across as a huge bit of embracing of the noise rock sounds that both are kind of rooted in to varying extents from project to project. And whether you prefer the French post-hardcore of Birds in Row or the Swiss noise rock of Coilguns, no matter what is more your bag from the perspective of their own unique discographies, coming together here, I think that you get the best of both worlds, and it creates something wholly unique for both of them. Easily one of the best EPs of the year, and actually for a large chunk of the year, a contender for the best EP of the year for me. But I digress, this one is still phenomenal, even not at the number 1 spot. Number 2, Alice Longyu Gao, Assembling Symbols into My Own Poetry. I think that this EP has kind of established Gao as one of my favorite musicians within the realm of electronic and pop music at this point, or at least within the respective undergrounds of those two genres. I mean, her last EP, Let's Hope Heteros Fail, Learn, and Retire, was universally beloved, at least somewhat, and I would say that that reception was very fair, because I also was one of those people who, you know, beloved it. But with that being said, a follow-up I was kind of nervous about, because I wasn't necessarily sure if she would be able to reach the same heights, if she would dial back things too much to kind of try to capitalize on some of the hype that she was seeing and kind of dial things in to be more accessible to a potentially growing fan base, etc., etc. The normal worries that one has when there's a musician that they love that's getting popular and they're happy for them, but also want them to continue, you know, doing what they do best. And I mean, all of my worries were completely tossed out of the window here. Assembling Symbols from My Own Poetry is really just phenomenal. It's some of the biggest, most danceable bangers that Gao has ever put out are featured on here, but at the same time, some of the most emotional moments that she's put out in her discography so far are featured here as well, making for an EP that's actually arguably even more dynamic than its predecessor, if not somewhat better at times. And as a whole, I just think that it's a really phenomenal piece of work from an artist that is horrifically underrated at this point. And I should also clarify, she never loses her aggression as a vocalist. Some of the more intense and in-your-face moments that you would expect from Let's Hope Heteros Fail, Learn, and Retire are still here. Just everything that is great about her is still here, as well as some new qualities. And while I don't necessarily think that this EP is better than what she's put out in the past, I do think it's just about on the same level, and I can't complain about that. This is just a fantastic EP, and I absolutely adore what is on here. It's very, very close to being my number one of the year, if not for a certain other band that put out one EP this year that eclipsed this one. Number one, my favorite EP of 2024, the Sawtooth Grin, Jabberwocky. I feel like the Sawtooth Grin have always been a criminally underrated band, even within the realm of mathcore, sasscore, the various cores that they are technically considered to be a part of. I mean, 2001's Cuddle Monster, for a long time their sole studio album, is a cult classic, deservedly so, and the 2011 EP Pervivore is a wonderful release as well, but when they returned in 2022 with their long-awaited sophomore studio album, Good, and the Sawtooth Grin finally stepped back into the spotlight seemingly permanently, I was elated beyond elated. And now here we are with their latest EP, Jabberwocky, my favorite EP of the year, and maybe my favorite thing that they have ever put out. This EP is absolutely immense in terms of how heavy it is, how visceral it is, how relentless it is. It is just intense throughout, nonstop, and it doesn't let up once throughout all four of its tracks. I mean, Richard Lombard just has these spine-tingling screeches and screams, and Jason Springman as a guitarist is so angular at times, yet at the same time knows how to deliver an amazing riff as well, making him one of the standout guitarists within the sort of modern mathcore world. I mean, as a whole, this entire EP is just so aggressive, so in your face, and so willing to just beat the listener to death with its bare hands that I can't help but absolutely adore everything about it. It's something that I've returned to constantly since it first came out. Every track here, all four of the tracks here, they're just perfect. It's a perfect EP just about, and about as close to a masterpiece as I think that I've heard from the realm of sasscore in general. And that's saying a lot because I really do love a lot of stuff that is qualified as sasscore or, you know, mathcore or whatever. There's a lot of cores and they all kind of bleed together, I'm sure you're aware. But I digress. Jabberwocky, just an amazing, phenomenal EP from an amazing, phenomenal band. My favorite EP of 2024, one of the best EPs the realm of just heavy, extreme music has seen in quite some time, in my opinion. And I mean, the Sawtooth Grin, as I stated in my original review for this, have always been an underappreciated band with unrelentingly violent artistic tendencies, and I think that Jabberwocky, despite having barely double digits of minutes in runtime, manages to see them take things to another level of intensity, and that's saying a lot considering where they were at before was already pretty high on that, you know, fake scale of intensity. Just an amazing EP, and my favorite of 2024, no question. And with that being said, that is the end of my top 20 EPs of 2024. The first of my 3 list videos that I do at the end of every year. Next up, come see my video tomorrow for my top 20 worst albums of 2024, and then you're never gonna believe this. Prepare for my top 50. That's a 5, not a 2. 50 best albums of 2024, and then we'll start talking about music in 2025, and hopefully I will more consistently upload. But until then, thank you for watching this video, thank you for watching the Infinite Jukebox, and I'll see you in the next one.